What if Harry Potter was sorted into Slytherin to ruthlessly dismantle Voldemort's legacy from the inside? Forget the Gryffindor hero. It's time for the Serpent's vengeance. Before we enter the snake pit, hit subscribe, drop a like, and comment your Hogwarts house below to check in. Number 4, Privet Drive, was a monument to the mundane. It sat nestled in a pristine, image-obsessed neighborhood in Little Whinging, Surrey, where every lawn was cut to the exact same height and every driveway hosted a gleaming, freshly washed car. The residents of this manicured suburban sprawl valued normalcy above all else. And 10-year-old Harry Potter was anything but normal. To his aunt and uncle, Vernon and Petunia Dursley, Harry was a stain on their perfect lives. He was a burden dumped on their doorstep, a secret they shoved out of sight whenever the neighbors came around. He was small for his age, with a thin face, knobby knees, and unruly black hair that refused to lay flat, no matter how much Aunt Petunia hacked at it with kitchen scissors. But his most defining feature was his eyes, a startling, vibrant green, partially hidden behind round glasses held together with copious amounts of Scotch tape. Harry did not have a bedroom. He slept in the dark, spider-infested cupboard under the stairs. In the beginning, when he was very young, the cupboard had terrified him. He had cried for parents he couldn't remember and wondered what he had done to deserve such a life. But as the years dragged on, the sadness had burned away, leaving behind a cold, dense core of simmering anger. Harry was a quiet boy, but his silence was not born of fear. It was born of calculation. From the shadows of his cupboard, he watched. He was intensely observant. He watched how Aunt Petunia wielded gossip like a weapon to keep the neighborhood wives in line. He watched how Uncle Vernon used his sheer physical size and loud voice to intimidate the people who worked beneath him at his drill company. And he watched how his cousin, Dudley, a massive, spoiled bully, threw tantrums to manipulate his parents into getting whatever he wanted. Harry learned early on that the world was divided into two categories, the predators and the prey. The Dursleys had cast him as the prey, but Harry had already decided he wouldn't play that role forever. It was a sweltering Tuesday morning in July when the pressure finally cracked. Harry was standing at the kitchen counter, cooking bacon. The sizzling grease popped, stinging his bare arms, but he didn't flinch. At the table, Dudley was loudly demanding a new television for his bedroom, violently slamming his heavy fists against the wood. "I need it," Dudley whined, his face turning an ugly shade of puce. "The one in the living room is too far away." "Of course, Stutters. Anything for my special popkin?" Aunt Petunia cooed, rushing to stroke his blonde hair. "Boy," Uncle Vernon barked, not looking up from his morning newspaper. "Bring the coffee. And if you burn the bacon like last time, you'll be locked in that cupboard without supper for a week." Harry turned off the stove.
His jaw tightened.
He picked up the heavy glass carafe of coffee and walked toward the table. As he approached, Dudley, acting on a cruel impulse, stuck his thick leg out to trip him. Harry stumbled. The hot coffee sloshed over the rim, splashing directly onto Uncle Vernon's freshly ironed dress shirt. Vernon leaped up, his chair scraping violently against the linoleum. His face, normally a dull pink, instantly flushed to a violent purple. "You clumsy, worthless freak," he roared. He lunged forward, grabbing the collar of Harry's oversized hand-me-down t-shirt, lifting him slightly off his feet. Saliva flew from Vernon's lips, landing on Harry's glasses. Harry didn't cry out. He didn't apologize. He just stared up into his uncle's furious face, his green eyes completely dead. But deep inside his chest, the heavy, cold knot of anger snapped open. He didn't just feel angry, he felt powerful. Suddenly, the air in the kitchen grew impossibly thick, like the suffocating pressure right before a massive thunderstorm. The temperature in the room plummeted by 10 degrees in a single second. The hairs on Vernon's arms stood straight up. "What are you?" Vernon started, but the words died in his throat. Crack. The glass carafe remaining on the table violently shattered into 100 jagged pieces, sending dark coffee spraying across the white walls. The heavy wooden kitchen chairs violently shuddered, scraping backward as if pushed by invisible hands. Above them, the The fluorescent light bulbs flickered wildly and blew out with a sharp pop, showering the linoleum with sparks. Petunia shrieked, pulling Dudley to her chest. Vernon, terrified by the sudden, oppressive energy radiating from the small boy in his grasp, dropped Harry as if he had caught fire. Harry landed on his feet, his breathing slow and even. He looked around the destroyed kitchen and then up at his aunt and uncle, who were cowering against the far wall, their eyes wide with raw, undisguised terror. "Clean it up," Vernon whispered, his voice trembling, all his previous bluster entirely gone. He didn't dare take a step closer. "Clean it up and get in your cupboard." Harry didn't say a word. He calmly picked up a rag and began wiping the coffee off the counters. Later that night, locked in the pitch-black darkness of his closet under the stairs, Harry lay awake. He wasn't scared of the punishment. He was replaying the moment in the kitchen over and over in his mind. He didn't know how he had broken the glass or blown the lights, but he knew with absolute certainty that he had done it. His anger wasn't just a feeling. It was a tangible, destructive force. For the first time in his life, Harry Potter smiled. He was different from them. And one day, they were going to pay for every moment he had spent in the dark. The letters started arriving exactly a week before Harry's 11th birthday. They were made of thick, heavy parchment, addressed in striking emerald green ink and sealed with purple wax. First, they came through the mail slot. Then, they were squeezed through the tight cracks around the windows. By Friday, they were shooting out of the chimney, like a flock of frantic white bats. Uncle Vernon completely unraveled. Driven to the brink of madness by a relentless assault of magic he couldn't bully into submission, he forced the family into his car and drove them into the middle of nowhere. Their desperate flight ended at a dilapidated, miserable shack perched on a jagged rock, surrounded by the freezing, violent waves of the ocean. It was a furious, storm-battered night. Rain lashed against the rotting wood, and thunder rattled the floorboards. Dudley was snoring on the moth-eaten sofa, while Vernon and Petunia cowered in the only bedroom. Harry sat on the cold floor, wide awake, staring at the digital face of Dudley's discarded watch as it ticked toward midnight. He wasn't afraid of the storm. In fact, he welcomed the chaotic energy. It felt like the air inside the kitchen back in Surrey, charged, heavy, and waiting to break. 11:59. 12 o'clock. Happy birthday.
Boom.
The entire shack shook violently. Dudley jolted awake with a pathetic squeal. Uncle Vernon burst out of the bedroom, clutching a rifle, his face pale and slick with sweat.
Boom.
With a deafening crunch, the heavy wooden door was torn off its hinges, slamming flat onto the floor. Lightning illuminated the massive silhouette filling the doorway. The man was a giant, his face hidden beneath a wild, tangled mane of hair and a thick, bristly beard. He ducked his massive head to clear the doorframe, bringing the scent of rain and heavy ocean salt into the room. Vernon raised his rifle with trembling hands. "I demand that you leave at once. You are breaking and entering." The giant merely snorted. He reached out, clamped his massive hand over the gun barrel, and twisted it upward into a useless knot of metal as easily as if it were made of rubber. Vernon whimpered, shrinking back against the wall. Harry watched from the shadows, his expression blank, but his mind sharp. So, this is what real power looks like, he thought, memorizing the ease with which his uncle had been utterly broken. "Budge up, yeah, great lump," the giant grunted, tossing a terrified Dudley off the sofa. He turned and spotted Harry in the dim light. "And here's Harry. Last time I saw you, you was only a baby. You've got your dad's look, but your mom's eyes." "Who are you?" Harry asked, his voice steady, betraying none of the intimidation the Dursleys were radiating. "Rubius Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts," the giant boomed warmly. He reached deep into his enormous coat and pulled out a slightly crumpled envelope. "Got Summit Fair ya? 'Bout time ya read it." Harry took the thick parchment. He didn't tear into it eagerly. He opened it with deliberate precision. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He read the words in silence. Witchcraft. Wizardry. It was the confirmation of everything he had begun to suspect. The shattered glass. The exploding lights. He wasn't a freak. He was a wizard. He's not going, Vernon shrieked from the corner, though he kept a safe distance. We swore when we took him and we'd put a stop to that rubbish. Harry's green eyes snapped up, fixing on Hagrid. They knew. All these years, they knew what I was and they lied. Hagrid's face darkened with sudden fury. He rounded on the Dursleys, his voice shaking the remaining glass in the window panes. It's an outrage. An insult. Keepin' the truth from the boy? Keepin' him from knowin' about his parents? What about my parents? Harry asked, his voice dropping in temperature. My aunt told me they died in a car crash. A car crash? Hagrid roared. A car crash kill Lily and James Potter? It's an outrage. A scandal. The giant took a heavy breath, pulling a massive, dirty handkerchief from his pocket.
No, Harry.
They didn't die in no crash. They were murdered. The word hung in the damp air. Hagrid reluctantly told the story. He spoke of a dark wizard, a man so terrible people still refused to say his name, Voldemort. He spoke of a brutal war, of betrayal, and of the night 10 years ago when the Dark Lord broke into their home and slaughtered James and Lily in cold blood. He spoke of how the Dark Wizard had turned his wand on baby Harry, only for the killing curse to mysteriously rebound, destroying Voldemort and leaving Harry with nothing but the lightning bolt scar on his forehead. Hagrid wiped a tear from his eye, expecting the small, scrawny boy to cry, or panic, or seek comfort. Harry did none of those things. He stood perfectly still in the dim, flickering light. The revelation washed over him not as a wave of grief, but as a rush of icy, clarifying truth. He wasn't just a boy abandoned by fate. He was the last survivor of a slaughtered family. The people who had murdered his parents, the people who had forced him into a decade of starvation and abuse in a dark cupboard, were out there. Harry looked down at the acceptance letter in his hand, feeling the heavy parchment beneath his fingertips. This wasn't just an invitation to a school. It was an arsenal. It was the key to unlocking the power he needed. He looked back up, his vivid green eyes hardened like cut emeralds in the darkness. He would learn their magic. He would find the ones responsible, and he would tear them down, piece by piece. The entrance to the American Wizarding Market was concealed behind the graffiti-covered brick wall of an abandoned brownstone in Lower Manhattan. With a few heavy taps of Hagrid's pink umbrella, the bricks folded away, peeling back to reveal a sprawling, cobblestone avenue buzzing with witches and wizards. Harry walked through the bustling crowds with calculated silence, his eyes darting to every storefront, every shadowed alley, and every face. He was stepping into a world he had belonged to all his life, yet he felt no childlike wonder, only a cold, burning need to understand the rules of this new game. Inside Madame Malkin's elite robes, Harry encountered his first peer. The boy standing on the fitting stool had pale, pointed features and sleek blonde hair. He introduced himself as Draco Malfoy. Draco immediately began to drawl about bloodlines, private helicopters, and his father's vast political influence in the wizarding government. He spoke with an air of absolute superiority. Harry didn't speak much, he just watched. He noticed how Draco used his family's wealth not simply to boast, but to establish immediate dominance, carefully positioning himself above everyone in the room. It was a tactical display, wielding privilege like a blunt weapon. Harry found the boy insufferably arrogant, but he took careful mental notes. If wealth and lineage were the currencies of power in this world, Harry needed to know who held them and how they could be manipulated. Grand Central Terminal was a chaotic sea of rushing commuters, but Harry moved through the crowd with absolute focus. Hagrid guided him to a solid marble pillar tucked securely between tracks 9 and 10. Taking a steadying breath, Harry walked straight through the stone, emerging onto a subterranean platform choked with thick, white steam. The Hogwarts Express, a massive, gleaming locomotive, sat waiting on the tracks. Finding an empty compartment near the back of the train, Harry was briefly joined by a red-haired boy named Ron Weasley. Ron was loud, aggressively friendly, and entirely transparent. Within 5 minutes, he had complained about his hand-me-down clothes, boasted about his older brothers, and became easily distracted by the candy trolley rolling past their door. Harry found him completely exhausting. Ron lacked focus. He was too driven by impulse and emotion. When Ron left the compartment to help another student look for a missing toad, Harry quietly stood up, grabbed his trunk, and relocated. He walked down the narrow aisle until he found a compartment occupied by two boys who sat in measured, comfortable silence. One was Blaise Zabini, who was casually flipping through a heavy, leather-bound book, and the other was Theodore Knott, who watched the door with sharp, calculating eyes. They didn't gasp at Harry. They didn't ask foolish, invasive questions about the lightning bolt scar on his forehead. They merely nodded, recognizing a shared appreciation for quiet observation. Harry sat down, looking out the window as the train sped north toward the mountains. This was the company he needed, people who thought before they spoke. Hogwarts Castle loomed out of the freezing mist, a formidable fortress of dark, imposing stone nestled deep within the treacherous, pine-covered peaks of the Adirondack Mountains. Inside the Great Hall, a ceiling enchanted to mirror the stormy night sky glared down at the first-year students as they lined up. When Professor McGonagall finally called his name, whispers erupted like wildfire across the four long tables. "Potter? Did she say Harry Potter?" Harry ignored the stares, walking with measured, even steps to the front of the hall. He sat on the wooden stool, and the ancient, frayed leather sorting hat was dropped onto his head, plunging his vision into total darkness. Well, a voice whispered directly into his mind. Such deep, cold anger. So much pain. Yet you aren't broken by it, are you? You are sharpening yourself on it. I want the ones who destroyed my family, Harry thought, his mental voice like ice. I want to tear their legacy apart. Gryffindor would take that courage, the hat mused, its voice echoing in his skull. But it would make you a reckless martyr. You would charge into the fire and die for your cause. But you don't want to die, do you, Harry Potter? You want your enemies to bleed.
Yes.
Then there is only one place for you. A house that will forge you into a weapon. A place where you can learn the cunning to destroy your enemies from the inside out. Put me there, Harry demanded. The hat took a breath, and its voice boomed loudly throughout the cavernous hall. Slytherin. There was no cheering. The Gryffindor table sat frozen in shock. The teachers exchanged horrified glances. The great hall fell into a stunned, deafening silence, save for the crackle of the torches. Harry calmly took off the hat, handed it back to a pale Professor McGonagall, and walked confidently toward the sea of green and silver. A cold, victorious smirk played on his lips. He was exactly where he needed to be. The hunt had begun. The Slytherin common room was a subterranean vault of wealth and shadows. Located deep in the dungeons of Hogwarts, its low ceilings were supported by rough-hewn stone pillars, and the only light came from the eerie, emerald glow of the Black Lake filtering through the enchanted windows, casting watery, serpentine reflections across the dark leather furniture and silver-tapestried walls. As Harry stepped through the concealed stone entrance, the oppressive atmosphere settled over him like a heavy cloak. He was not met with cheers or warm welcomes. Instead, he walked into an ambush of icy glares and hushed, venomous whispers. The older students lounged in high-backed chairs by the grand fireplace, their eyes tracking his every movement with undisguised hostility. To them, Harry Potter was an anomaly, a glitch in the system. He was the boy who had inexplicably shattered the Dark Lord, the leader their parents had revered and followed. For an 11-year-old to walk into the heart of Slytherin House bearing the lightning bolt scar was an act of profound disrespect. Draco Malfoy was already holding court near a massive silver serpent statue, surrounded by a group of broad-shouldered, thick-skulled boys who looked more like hired muscle than first-year students. Draco sneered as Harry approached, his pale eyes glinting with malice in the dim light. Well, Draco drawled, his voice carrying easily across the silent room. Looks like the hat made a mistake. What's a mudblood-loving Potter doing in our house? Did it take pity on you, realizing you wouldn't survive a week with the lions? Harry didn't rise to the bait. He didn't flush with anger or reach for his wand. He simply stopped, his vivid green eyes scanning the room, cataloging every face, every smirk, and every sneer. He looked at the heavy silver crests pinned to their robes, representing centuries of old money and dark magic. And then, the bitter, jagged reality of his situation truly set in. He was not just sharing a dorm with bullies. He was sleeping in the exact same room as the children of the very people who had funded, supported, and cheered for his parents' murderer. These were the heirs to the Death Eaters. The money that bought their tailored robes and imported broomsticks was the same money that had financed the destruction of his family. A cold, razor-sharp smile touched the corner of Harry's mouth. It was a smile completely devoid of warmth, and it made Draco's sneer falter for a fraction of a second. "It didn't make a mistake, Malfoy," Harry said softly, his voice slicing through the heavy silence of the dungeon. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He turned and walked toward the first-year dormitories, leaving a deeply unsettled tension in his wake. As he closed the heavy oak door to his room, Harry realized that surviving Slytherin wouldn't be enough. He had to conquer it. These children were his first targets. They were the key to dismantling the legacy of the people who had killed his parents, and he would use them all. Severus Snape stood at the front of the freezing potions classroom, his black robes billowing around him like the wings of a massive bat. He possessed a terrifying presence, capable of silencing a room filled with rowdy teenagers with a single, sweeping glare. But beneath his cold, impenetrable exterior, a violent storm of conflict was raging. Harry Potter was a Slytherin. When the Hat had shouted the word the previous night, Snape had felt the floor drop out from beneath him. He had prepared himself for a mini James Potter, arrogant, reckless, and draped in Gryffindor red. He had not prepared himself to see Lily's bright green eyes staring back at him from the heart of his own house, surrounded by the ravenous children of his former Death Eater comrades. Snape knew the danger the boy was in. If Snape showed even a fraction of favor toward the boy who had defeated the Dark Lord, he would lose the trust of the old blood families, compromising his position as a double agent and exposing Harry to even greater danger. He had no choice. He had to be cruel. He had to play the part of the vindictive, Death Eater sympathizing potions master flawlessly. "Potter," Snape barked, his voice snapping like a whip. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry sat straight in his chair, his expression unreadable. He had spent the morning reading his textbook, but he didn't know the answer. "I don't know, sir." "Thought you wouldn't open a book before coming, Potter?" Snape sneered, pacing slowly down the aisle. He threw two more impossibly advanced questions at the boy, ensuring the entire class, especially Draco Malfoy, who was snickering in the front row, saw Harry humiliated. Yet Harry didn't flinch. He didn't pout or look away. He maintained eye contact with Snape, absorbing the hostility with an eerie, clinical detachment. It unsettled Snape deeply. There was no James Potter in that stare, but the fierce, unyielding intellect was all Lily. As the class transitioned to brewing a simple cure for boils, Snape prowled the dungeon, criticizing everyone except the Slytherins. He paused near Harry's workstation, watching as the boy methodically crushed his snake fangs with measured, careful strikes. Out of the corner of his eye, Snape saw a sudden movement. A heavy-set boy named Goyle, sitting one row over, flicked his wrist. A handful of dried porcupine quills, the exact ingredient that would cause the cauldron to violently melt and shower Harry in acidic boils, sailed through the air, aimed perfectly at Harry's simmering brew. Harry hadn't seen it, but Snape did. Without breaking his stride or changing his sneering expression, Snape subtly twitched the index finger of his left hand beneath the folds of his robes. A pulse of wandless magic shot across the room. The quills vanished into thin air just an inch above Harry's cauldron. Snape stopped in front of Harry's desk, glaring down his hooked nose. "Your chopping technique is atrocious, Potter. 5 points from Slytherin for your staggering incompetence." Harry looked at Snape, and then his eyes flicked quickly to Goyle, who was staring in dumbfounded confusion at his empty hand, and back to Snape. A flicker of profound realization crossed Harry's green eyes. He had deduced exactly what had just happened. Snape turned on his heel and walked away, his heart pounding. The boy was far too observant. This game was going to be infinitely more dangerous than he had ever anticipated. The Hogwarts library was a cavernous sanctuary of towering bookshelves, smelling of old parchment, binding glue, and dust. For Harry, it was an armory. While the rest of the first years spent their free time gossiping in the courtyards or wandering the sprawling castle grounds, Harry secluded himself in the darkest corners of the restricted section's perimeter, burying himself in history. He wasn't interested in standard coursework. He was hunting for names. Sitting at a heavy oak table illuminated by a single floating candle, Harry traced his finger down the yellowed pages of a massive tome titled The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts in the 20th Century. He was looking for the exact details of the First Wizarding War, a subject most adults in the wizarding world treated as a taboo. He found the chapter on the Dark Lord's inner circle, the Death Eaters. Lucius Malfoy, Tiberius Knott,
Crabbe, Goyle,
Lestrange, Rosier. Harry copied the names down onto a piece of parchment, his handwriting sharp and precise. He stared at the list, feeling that familiar, icy knot of rage tighten in his chest. These were the men and women who had terrorized the country. These were the people who had stood by, cheered, and profited while a monster murdered James and Lily Potter. And thanks to a corrupt legal system and copious amounts of gold, almost all of them had walked free, claiming they had been acting under mind control. It was a pathetic, transparent lie. Harry folded the parchment and slid it into his pocket. He thought of his dorm room. Draco Malfoy, Theodore Knott, Vincent Crabbe, Gregory Goyle. The sins of the fathers were currently sleeping in the beds next to his. They paraded around the dungeons with absolute entitlement, entirely unpunished for the blood on their families' hands. If Harry tried to attack them directly, he would be expelled. The wizarding world protected its wealthy elites. Gryffindor recklessness would only get him thrown back into the dark cupboard under the stairs in Surrey. No, he needed a Slytherin approach. He had to be venomous. He had to turn their own arrogance against them, isolate them, and break their power from the inside. He would not just defeat Draco Malfoy, he would completely subjugate him. He would build an empire within the snake pit, brick by brick, until the children of the Death Eaters answered only to the boy they were raised to hate. The long game had officially begun. The tension in the Slytherin common room was reaching a boiling point, and Draco Malfoy was desperate to reassert his dominance. Harry's quiet, unnerving confidence was undermining the hierarchy Draco had expected to effortlessly control. The challenge came on a Thursday evening. Midnight duel. Potter. Draco sneered, cornering Harry near the fireplace. Crabbe and Goyle cracked their knuckles menacingly behind him. Just you and me. In the trophy room. Unless you're too much of a coward to face me without teachers around. Harry looked at Draco, his green eyes thoroughly unimpressed. He analyzed the situation instantly. Draco was a coward who hid behind two larger boys. There was zero chance he intended to fight fair. Furthermore, sneaking out after curfew was an automatic detention and a massive loss of house points. It was a crude, obvious trap. Fine, Harry said smoothly, his voice devoid of emotion. Midnight. Draco smirked triumphantly. Don't be late. That night, at 1:45, the dorm room was pitch black. Harry lay in his four-poster bed, the green silk hangings drawn tight. He listened as Draco's bed creaked. He heard the soft padding of footsteps, the whispering, and the door clicking shut as Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle left the room. Harry didn't move an inch. He simply closed his eyes and went to sleep. The next morning, the Slytherin table in the Great Hall was buzzing with furious whispers. Draco was missing from breakfast. News quickly spread that the caretaker, Argus Filch, had caught Malfoy and his goons wandering near the trophy room in the middle of the night. They had each lost 50 house points and earned a month of brutal detentions cleaning the Ollery without magic. Harry sat quietly at the end of the table, methodically cutting his eggs. He felt a presence settle onto the bench across from him. He looked up to see Blaise Zabini, his dark eyes sharp and appraising. A moment later, Daphne Greengrass, a notoriously aloof girl with perfect blonde hair and cold blue eyes, slid into the seat next to Blaise. Both of them belonged to ancient, wealthy families, but unlike Malfoy, their parents had remained strictly neutral during the war. They possessed all the status of the elite without the political baggage of the Death Eaters. "You knew he was going to tip off Filch," Daphne said softly, pouring herself a cup of tea with elegant precision. It wasn't a question, it was an acknowledgement of a successful maneuver. "Malfoy relies on the assumption that everyone around him is as impulsive and stupid as he is," Harry replied evenly, taking a sip of pumpkin juice. "It makes him entirely predictable." Blaise smirked, a genuine expression of respect dawning on his face. "He's going to be furious, you know. He'll make your life miserable." "He can try," Harry said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a chilling, absolute certainty. "But he is loud, and loud people are easily silenced. I prefer to operate quietly." Daphne and Blaise exchanged a brief, meaningful look. They hated Draco's loud, clumsy attempts to rule the house. It was deeply un-Slytherin. In Harry Potter, they saw something far more dangerous and, consequently, far more valuable. "We study in the alcove near the portrait of Salazar Slytherin after dinner," Daphne said, not looking at him directly, maintaining plausible deniability. "You should join us. It's much quieter there." Harry nodded once. The foundation of his network had just been laid. The cold, crisp air of the Scottish Highlands whipped across the manicured lawns as the Slytherin and Gryffindor first years lined up for their very first flying lesson. 20 broomsticks lay in neat rows on the frost-covered grass. "Stick your right hand over your broom," barked Madame Hooch, the hawk-eyed instructor, "and say up." Harry commanded the broom. It snapped into his hand with immediate, magnetic violence. He felt a strange, thrilling hum of magic vibrate through the wood. For the first time since arriving at Hogwarts, he felt a surge of pure, unadulterated instinct. Things quickly descended into chaos when a nervous Gryffindor boy named Neville Longbottom lost control of his broom, rocketing into the air before crashing heavily to the ground, breaking his wrist. As Madame Hooch marched the weeping boy to the hospital wing, she ordered the rest of the class to stay firmly on the ground. Naturally, Draco Malfoy ignored the order. Draco stepped forward, a cruel smirk twisting his face as he held up a small, glittering glass sphere, a remembrall that had slipped from Neville's pocket during the fall. "Look at this." Maybe if the fat lump had given this a squeeze, he'd have remembered to fall on his fat arse. The Slytherins laughed. The Gryffindors yelled in outrage. Harry simply watched, calculating the angle. "Give it here, Malfoy," Harry said, stepping out of the line. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise, demanding absolute attention. Malfoy sneered, mounting his broom. "I think I'll leave it somewhere for Longbottom to find. How about up a tree?" He kicked off the ground, hovering 20 feet in the air. "Come and get it, Potter." Harry mounted his broom and kicked off. The moment his feet left the grass, the world slowed down. The wind roared in his ears, but his mind was perfectly silent, sharp, and focused. He didn't just fly, he dominated the air. He shot upward like a bullet, hovering directly in front of Malfoy, their eyes locked. Draco's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine panic. He hadn't expected Harry to actually follow him, let alone with such terrifying speed and grace. "Give it here," Harry repeated quietly, leaning forward, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "Or I'll knock you off that broom myself." Draco hesitated, his grip tightening on the wood. Desperate to maintain his pride, he yelled, "Catch it if you can, then," and hurled the glass sphere as hard as he could toward the towering stone walls of the castle. Harry didn't even blink. He banked hard, diving into a steep, near-vertical plunge. The wind screamed against his robes. The ground rushed up to meet him at a sickening speed. He ignored the terrified screams of the students below. His eyes were locked solely on the glittering glass ball. He extended his hand, pulling out of the dive mere inches from the grass, and closed his fingers tightly around the remembrall. He landed smoothly, barely kicking up a blade of grass. He didn't celebrate. He just turned and looked up at Malfoy, who was still hovering awkwardly in the air, looking utterly foolish and totally outclassed. Harry had humiliated him without raising his voice or breaking a sweat. It was a cold, absolute victory. Harry Potter. Professor McGonagall was sprinting across the lawn, her face white with fury. Never in all my time at Hogwarts. You could have broken your neck. She marched him swiftly back toward the castle, bypassing the Gryffindor tower and heading straight down into the cold, damp dungeons. She knocked firmly on a heavy wooden door. Professor Snape opened it, his dark eyes instantly narrowing at the sight of Harry. "Severus," McGonagall said, breathless. "I have found you a seeker. The boy is a natural." A dive of 50 feet, pulled out without a scratch. Charlie Weasley couldn't have done it. Snape stared at Harry. He looked at the boy's calm, unrepentant expression. Snape knew exactly what this meant. To put a first year on a house Quidditch team was unprecedented in a century. It would grant Harry massive social capital, elevating him to a status of near royalty within Slytherin House. It was the perfect, unassailable excuse to protect the boy and ensure he wasn't bullied by the older students. A slow, terrifyingly calculating smirk touched Snape's lips. "Is that so?" Snape murmured, his dark eyes locking onto Harry's vibrant green ones. "Well then, we wouldn't want to waste such potential. Welcome to the Slytherin team, Potter." Harry nodded, his expression giving nothing away, but internally, the gears were turning faster than ever. He had just been handed the exact weapon he needed to solidify his empire. The Great Hall was a sea of floating jack-o'-lanterns and enchanted bats, echoing with the raucous laughter of the Halloween feast. Harry sat quietly among the Slytherins, picking at a slice of pumpkin tart, entirely detached from the festive cheer. His attention was abruptly captured when the heavy oak doors burst open. Professor Quirrell sprinted into the hall, his turban askew and his face a mask of absolute terror. "Troll. In the dungeons. Thought you ought to know." He immediately collapsed in a dead faint. Pandemonium erupted. Students screamed, scrambling over the long wooden tables. Dumbledore had to fire off several deafening purple firecrackers from the tip of his wand to restore order, commanding the prefects to lead their houses back to their dormitories. Harry stood up, his mind working with terrifying speed. The dungeons. The Slytherin common room was in the dungeons. Sending them back down, there was a tactical error of massive proportions. But more importantly, Harry noted Quirrell's perfectly timed entrance. A troll didn't just wander into a heavily warded ancient castle. It was a diversion. As the Slytherin prefects corralled the first years toward the marble staircase, Harry slipped effortlessly into the shadows of a tapestried alcove. He was not going back to the dorm. Moving silently through the deserted corridors, Harry caught the horrific stench of the troll before he saw it, a foul mixture of old sweat and raw sewage. The massive, 12-foot beast was dragging a heavy wooden club, lumbering clumsily toward the girls' bathroom on the first floor. Harry knew Hermione Granger was in there. He had overheard Ron Weasley mocking her earlier that day, sending the girl fleeing in tears. A Gryffindor might have drawn their wand and charged the beast with a battle cry. Harry, however, calculated the angles. He didn't need to defeat the troll, he only needed to trap it. Harry picked up a heavy brass candlestick from a nearby table. Taking a deep breath, he hurled it down the opposite corridor. It shattered against the stone floor with a loud, ringing crash. The troll paused, its tiny, pea-sized brain struggling to process the noise. It turned its ugly, lumpy head away from the bathroom door, grunting stupidly as it shambled toward the source of the sound. Harry moved like a ghost. He darted forward, grabbed the heavy iron ring of the bathroom door, and pulled it firmly shut, sliding the thick deadbolt into place. Hermione was secure. He then turned his attention back to the troll, which was now distracted in a narrow, dead-end corridor. Using a precise, textbook levitation charm, a spell he had mastered weeks ago in the quiet solitude of his dorm, Harry targeted a heavy stone gargoyle perched on a ledge directly above the beast. With a sharp flick of his wand, he released the charm. The solid stone gargoyle plummeted, striking the troll squarely on the back of its thick skull with a sickening crack. The beast swayed, its eyes rolling back into its head, and collapsed face-first onto the flagstones. The earth-shaking thud echoed through the castle. When Professors McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell finally arrived, panting and wands raised, they found Harry standing calmly over the unconscious beast. 10 minutes later, the bathroom door was unlocked, revealing a terrified but unharmed Hermione Granger. When McGonagall demanded an explanation, Harry provided a perfectly constructed half-truth about spotting the beast and using the environment to neutralize it. Hermione looked from the unconscious troll to the calm, calculating Slytherin boy. She realized instantly that Harry had not sought glory. He had sought the most efficient solution to save her life. "Thank you," she whispered later in the shadows of the hallway. "Don't thank me," Harry replied evenly. "Just remember it. Information and loyalty are the most valuable currencies in this school, Granger. I suggest we trade." Hermione, a girl who valued intellect above all else, nodded. The foundation of a secret, out-of-house academic alliance was firmly set in stone. The morning after the troll incident, the Great Hall was buzzing with rumors, but Harry's focus was entirely on the high table. He watched Severus Snape limp heavily to his chair, his face drawn and pale. Harry recalled the Halloween feast perfectly. While everyone else had been staring in panic at the fainting Quirrell, Harry had noticed Snape slipping quietly out a side door. "The troll was a smokescreen," Harry murmured, pushing his porridge around his bowl. Blaise Zabini, sitting to his right, didn't look up from his prophet. Obviously, a mountain troll lacks the cognitive capacity to bypass the outer wards without a faculty member opening the door. Someone wanted the castle distracted. Snape's leg, Daphne Greengrass noted quietly from across the table, her ice-blue eyes fixed on her teacup. "He's heavily bandaged beneath his robes. He took a hit last night." "The third-floor corridor," Harry deduced, his voice dropping to a near-silent whisper. "Dumbledore explicitly warned everyone that it was strictly forbidden to those who do not wish to die a very painful death. Snape went up there during the panic, and whatever is guarding that floor took a piece out of him." Harry needed more intelligence. He activated the network he had been carefully cultivating. Over the next week, he traded minor favors, a translated runes essay here, a heads-up about a trick step there, to gather fragments of information from older students across the houses. It was Hermione Granger, however, who provided the missing puzzle piece. Meeting Harry in the dusty, abandoned section of the library on a Tuesday evening, she slid a heavily worn book across the table. "I checked the records," she whispered, looking nervously over her shoulder. "Hagrid withdrew something from Vault 713 at Gringotts Bank the exact same day someone tried to rob it. Whatever it is, Dumbledore moved it here." Harry's mind raced. "And the guard dog?" "I accidentally walked onto the third floor on my way to Charms last week," Hermione confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "It's a Cerberus, a massive, three-headed dog. It's standing on a trapdoor." Harry leaned back in his chair, the pieces snapping together into a crystal-clear picture. There was a vault, a three-headed dog, a diversionary troll, and a potions master who was either trying to steal the object or protect it from someone else. The school was not a safe haven. It was a vault, and Harry intended to crack it. Winter break arrived, blanketing the Adirondack Mountains in a thick, blinding layer of snow. The castle emptied out, leaving the halls echoing and silent. Harry chose to stay. The Dursleys had never been his family, and returning to the suburbs of New York was a tactical retreat he was unwilling to make. He spent his nights exploring the castle, aided by a mysterious, anonymous Christmas gift, an invisibility cloak that had once belonged to his father. The cloak was a tool of ultimate stealth, allowing him to bypass Filch and map the castle's secret passageways with impunity. It was during one of these nocturnal expeditions that he found the classroom. It was an unused, dusty chamber, filled with stacked desks. In the center of the room stood a magnificent mirror, as high as the ceiling, with an ornate gold frame. The inscription across the top read, "Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oidonwosi." Harry stepped in front of the glass. He expected to see his own reflection. Instead, the glass rippled like water, revealing a scene that made his breath catch in his throat. He saw a man and a woman standing behind him, James and Lily Potter. They were exactly as he had imagined them from the few photographs he had managed to secure. But they were not smiling with tragic, mournful longing. They were looking down at him with fierce, blazing pride. Harry looked at his own reflection in the mirror. He was older, taller, and dressed in sharp, impeccably tailored black robes. In his hand, he held a wand that hummed with terrifying power. And at his feet lay a pile of broken, defeated figures, their faces obscured by silver masks, writhing in the ashes of a destroyed legacy. Standing directly behind the fallen Death Eaters was the distorted, shadowy figure of Voldemort himself, chained and entirely broken. This was not a vision of a lost childhood. It was a prophecy of absolute vengeance. Harry sat in front of the mirror for hours, completely captivated, burning the image of his victory into his very soul. He did not cry. He just smiled, a cold, terrifying smile. Back again, Harry? Harry didn't jump. He had heard the soft swish of robes moments before. He turned his head slowly to see Albus Dumbledore stepping out of the shadows. "I didn't see you, Headmaster," Harry said smoothly, standing up and brushing the dust from his robes. Dumbledore approached the mirror, his blue eyes twinkling, though a deep, perceptive sharpness lay beneath them. "I see you, like hundreds before you, have discovered the delights of the Mirror of Heist. It shows us nothing more or less than the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts." Dumbledore looked at the boy. "Tell me, Harry, what is it that a boy who has lost so much sees when he looks into the glass?" Dumbledore fully expected a tearful confession. He expected the boy to say he saw his family alive and whole, a tragic portrait of a stolen childhood. Harry looked directly into Dumbledore's eyes. He knew exactly what the old man wanted to hear, but he refused to play the broken orphan. "I see a world where the people who hurt them are erased," Harry said, his voice as calm and hard as a glacier. "I see a world where their legacy is ripped up by the roots." The twinkle in Dumbledore's eyes instantly vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine alarm. He looked closely at the 11-year-old boy in front of him. There was no vulnerability in Harry's posture. There was only a sharpened edge, a hardened intent that mirrored the very darkest wizards Dumbledore had ever faced. "The mirror gives us neither knowledge nor truth, Harry," Dumbledore warned, his voice grave. "Men have wasted away before it, entranced by what they have seen, or been driven mad. Do not let vengeance consume the life your mother died to give you." "Vengeance isn't consuming me, Professor," Harry replied softly, turning to walk away into the darkness of the corridor. "It's fueling me." Spring brought a thaw to the frozen grounds of Hogwarts, but the atmosphere inside the Slytherin first-year dorm was icier than ever. Draco Malfoy, still smarting from his humiliating defeat in the skies and his month of brutal detentions, had been desperately looking for an angle to reassert his dominance over Harry. He thought he found it in Rubeus Hagrid. Harry had maintained a careful, strategic relationship with the gamekeeper. Hagrid was a fountain of unquestioning loyalty and, more importantly, careless information. During one of their afternoon teas, Hagrid had foolishly revealed that he had won a dragon egg in a card game down at a local pub in the village. Within weeks, a Norwegian ridgeback hatched in the middle of Hagrid's wooden cabin. Harry knew it was a disaster waiting to happen. An illegal dragon on school grounds was a one-way ticket to Azkaban for Hagrid and a massive loss of an intelligence asset for Harry. But before Harry could formulate a quiet solution to dispose of the beast, he noticed Draco Malfoy slipping away from the cabin window one afternoon, a triumphant sneer plastered across his pale face. Draco had seen the dragon. That night in the dorm, Draco stood by his four-poster bed, chest puffed out with arrogant victory. Crabbe and Goyle stood behind him like stone gargoyles. "I saw it, Potter," Draco gloated, his voice dripping with malice. "That oaf Hagrid is raising a dragon. I'm going to McGonagall first thing tomorrow morning. Hagrid will be sacked, maybe even arrested. And since you're so chummy with him, I'll make sure she knows you were involved." Harry, who was sitting comfortably in an armchair reading a book on advanced defensive theory, didn't even look up. He slowly turned a page. "You aren't going to tell anyone, Malfoy," Harry said quietly. Draco laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Is that an order? You don't own this house, Potter. You can't stop me." Harry finally closed the book with a sharp snap. The sound echoed loudly in the quiet room. He stood up, closing the distance between them with slow, predatory steps. Crabbe and Goyle shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the dangerous shift in the air. "You'll stay entirely silent, Malfoy," Harry said, his voice dropping to a silken, venomous whisper. "Because if you walk into McGonagall's office, I will walk into the Daily Prophet's office." Draco frowned, his arrogance faltering. "What are you talking about?" "I've spent the last 6 months analyzing your mail," Harry lied smoothly, tapping into the boy's deepest insecurities. "I know exactly how much gold your father is funneling into the Department of Magical Law Enforcement to keep those old ministry raids off your manor. I know about the dark artifacts hidden beneath your drawing room floor. If Hagrid goes down for a dragon, Lucius Malfoy goes down for bribing ministry officials and hoarding illegal dark magic. How do you think your father will react when he finds out his 11-year-old son triggered a full-scale investigation into the Malfoy estate just to win a schoolyard grudge?" All the color violently drained from Draco's face. He looked like he was going to be sick. He didn't know if Harry was bluffing, but the risk was utterly catastrophic. Lucius Malfoy's wrath was something Draco feared above all else. You wouldn't," Draco stammered, his bravado shattering into a million pieces. "Try me," Harry challenged, his green eyes boring into Draco's pale blue ones. "Now sit down and shut up. I handle the dragon." The checkmate was absolute. Over the next 3 days, Harry orchestrated a flawless extraction. Using his invisibility cloak, he arranged for Charlie Weasley's friends to pick up the dragon at the top of the astronomy tower at midnight. Harry executed the handoff perfectly, leaving no trace. Draco, desperate to regain some control and hoping to catch Harry out of bed, sneaked out to find them. Instead, Draco was caught by Professor McGonagall, wandering the corridors alone at 1 a.m. Draco was slapped with another massive loss of house points and a second round of detentions. The entire Slytherin house turned on him for his sheer incompetence. When Draco returned to the dorm the next night, utterly defeated, he didn't even look at Harry. He just climbed into his bed and pulled the curtains shut. Harry had not just beaten Draco Malfoy, he had completely broken his political power within the house. The dorm, and by extension the first-year hierarchy, was now exclusively Harry's domain. The pieces were fully assembled. It was late May, and the oppressive heat of impending summer was beginning to creep into the dungeons. Harry sat in the shadowy alcove near the portrait of Salazar Slytherin, flanked by Daphne Greengrass and Blaise Zabini. Across the small stone table sat Hermione Granger, who had sneaked down under the cover of Harry's invisibility cloak. "Nicholas Flamel," Hermione whispered, laying out a heavy piece of parchment. "The Sorcerer's Stone. It produces the elixir of life, which makes the drinker immortal. That's what the Cerberus is guarding on the 3rd floor. And Quirrell is the one trying to steal it," Harry stated with absolute certainty. Daphne frowned slightly. "Quirrell?" The man stutters when a strong breeze hits him. "You thought it was Snape." "Snape is a diversion," Harry corrected smoothly. "Snape plays the villains so perfectly that everyone ignores the terrified, pathetic defense against the dark arts teacher. But Quirrell's fear is an act. He let the troll in on Halloween to test the security. And I've noticed the way he looks at me when he thinks no one is watching. It isn't fear, it's hatred." "Why would Quirrell want the stone?" Blaise asked, leaning forward, his strategic mind engaged. "He's not nearly powerful enough to bypass Dumbledore's traps just to live forever." "He doesn't want it for himself," Harry said, his voice turning cold. "He wants it for Voldemort." Hermione gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, while Blaise and Daphne visibly stiffened. Using the Dark Lord's actual name in the Slytherin dungeons was akin to dropping a lit match in a powder keg. "Voldemort is not completely dead," Harry continued, refusing to yield to their fear. "He's a parasite. He needs the stone to resurrect himself. And Quirrell is going to make his move tonight. Dumbledore has been called away to the Ministry of Magic on an urgent owl's request. The board is entirely clear." "Then we have to send an owl to Dumbledore immediately," Hermione urged, her Gryffindor sensibilities flaring up. "We have to tell Professor McGonagall." "No," Harry said flatly. "Harry, this is madness. We are first years." Hermione hissed. If we go to McGonagall, she won't believe us. She'll lock us in our dorms, and Quirrell will walk out of this castle with a stone, bringing the man who murdered my parents back to life, Harry said, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. This is my war, and I am not going to let him resurrect. He looked around the table at his carefully assembled network. I am going through that trapdoor tonight, Harry declared, taking absolute command of the operation. I need your assets. Hermione, you have an encyclopedic knowledge of magical theory and counter curses. I need you on the ground with me. Hermione swallowed hard, terrified, but she nodded slowly. Her loyalty to Harry's intellect outweighed her adherence to the rules. Blaise, Harry turned to the quiet boy. You have the sharpest tactical mind in this house. You're coming with us. I need a second set of eyes to analyze the defensive structures Dumbledore put in place. Blaise smirked, a dangerous glint in his eye. A heist against the headmaster's personal vault? I wouldn't miss it. Daphne, Harry said, looking at the blonde girl. You are our anchor. You stay in the common room. If we aren't back by dawn, you take this envelope. He slid a sealed piece of parchment across the table. It contains everything we know. You deliver it directly to Lucius Malfoy, via your father. Daphne looked shocked. Lucius? Why him? Because if Voldemort returns as a half-dead parasite, relying on a stuttering idiot like Quirrell, Lucius Malfoy will realize his comfortable, wealthy life at the top of the Ministry is about to be destroyed by a madman, Harry calculated coldly. Malfoy is a survivor, not a loyalist. He will crush Quirrell to protect his own political standing. We use their cowardice against them. Daphne slowly pocketed the envelope. You really have thought of every angle, haven't you? Harry stood up, pulling the silvery fabric of the invisibility cloak from his bag. The time for waiting and observing was over.
It was time to strike.
Let's go, Harry commanded. It's time to deny the Dark Lord his prize. The third-floor corridor was completely submerged in shadows, the only sound being the low, rhythmic, thunderous breathing of the massive Cerberus behind the locked door. Harry, Blaise, and Hermione stood perfectly still beneath the shimmering fabric of the invisibility cloak. Harry slowly pulled a small, enchanted wooden flute from his pocket, a trinket he had specifically requested from his Slytherin network in exchange for a translated ancient runes essay. He brought it to his lips and blew a haunting, repetitive melody. He kicked the door open. The three-headed dog, which had been beginning to stir at the scent of intruders, instantly went glassy-eyed. It swayed on its massive paws before collapsing heavily over the wooden trapdoor, fast asleep. Move, Harry commanded quietly. Together, they heaved the heavy beast's paw aside and pulled open the trapdoor, revealing a pitch-black abyss. Without a second thought, Harry jumped, followed immediately by Blaise and Hermione. They landed on a bed of soft, damp tendrils that instantly began to wrap around their ankles and waists like a nest of tightening snakes. It was Devil's Snare. Stop moving, Hermione snapped, her encyclopedic knowledge kicking in as the vines coiled aggressively around Blaise's struggling arms. It's Devil's Snare. It thrives in the dark and damp. If you fight it, it kills you faster. Then we don't fight it, we burn it, Harry said coldly. He didn't waste time trying to relax his body. He simply drew his wand. Incendio. A jet of furious blue flames erupted from his wand tip, striking the core of the aggressive plant. The vines shrieked, violently recoiling and dropping all three of them onto the cold stone floor below. Harry brushed off his robes, his expression completely unfazed. Efficient. They moved swiftly through a chamber filled with enchanted, flying keys, which Harry bypassed effortlessly by utilizing his natural seeker instincts, pinning the old silver key to the wall with a single, aggressive dive on a provided broomstick, before arriving at a massive, dimly lit cavern. The floor was a giant, checkered board. Towering stone statues, carved with brutal, medieval features, stood waiting. Wizard's chess, Blaise murmured, a rare smile crossing his dark features as he stepped forward to examine the board. Finally, something civilized. The only way across is to play our way through. Then take command, Zabini, Harry said, stepping onto the board to take the place of a bishop, while Hermione took the place of a rook. But remember where we are. This isn't a friendly match in the common room. I don't want a long game. I want a slaughter. Blaze's eyes gleamed. He took the position of a knight and began calling out commands. What followed was a masterclass in ruthless Slytherin pragmatism. A Gryffindor might have tried to protect every single piece, extending the game and risking everything on a noble, sacrificial final move. Blaze and Harry did the exact opposite. They played aggressively, sacrificing their own pawns and knights without a shred of hesitation to draw the white pieces out of position. When the White Queen moved to destroy one of their knights, Blaze coldly directed a pawn into her path, feeding the piece to the opposition just to open a direct lane. Bishop to e5, Blaze ordered, his voice echoing in the cavern. Harry moved diagonally across the board, drawing his wand. He didn't just check the White King. He shattered the defending White Rook into 1,000 pieces of rubble with a localized blasting curse, clearing the board entirely. The White King took off his crown and threw it at Harry's feet. Checkmate. Brutal, fast, and entirely unsentimental. Good game, Harry noted, stepping over the rubble. Let's finish this. The next chamber reeked of dead troll, but the beast was already unconscious on the floor, bleeding from a massive head wound. Quirrell had already passed through. They entered the final anteroom. The moment they stepped across the threshold, purple flames erupted in the doorway behind them, and black flames roared to life in the doorway ahead, trapping them in a room with a table holding 7 oddly shaped bottles and a roll of parchment. Hermione immediately gravitated toward the parchment. It's a logic puzzle, she realized, reading the riddle. Brilliant. Most great wizards haven't got an ounce of logic. They'd be stuck in here forever. Solve it, Harry ordered, his eyes locked on the black flames separating him from his parents' murderer. It took Hermione less than a minute. The smallest bottle will get you through the black fire, she pointed. But there's only enough for one person. The rounded bottle at the end will take us back through the purple flames. Harry picked up the smallest vial, filled with an icy liquid. You and Blaze take the potion to go back. Get to the Ollery. If I am not out in an hour, send the letter to Malfoy. Potter, Blaze said, his voice unusually grave. Don't die. It would be terribly inconvenient for my study schedule. I have no intention of dying, Zabini, Harry replied. As Hermione and Blaze retreated through the purple fire, Harry turned to face the black flames. Before he could raise the vial to his lips, a voice sliced through the heavy silence of the chamber. I thought I might find you here, Potter. Harry froze. Stepping out of the deep shadows in the corner of the room was Severus Snape, his dark eyes fixed intensely on Harry. His wand was drawn, but not pointed. Harry's mind raced. Had he miscalculated? Was Snape working with Quirrell after all? Harry tightened his grip on his wand, ready to strike, despite knowing he was completely outmatched by the potion's master. Snape saw the subtle shift in Harry's stance. Lower your wand, foolish boy, Snape sneered, though the venom in his voice lacked its usual bite. If I wanted you dead, you would have been boiling in your own cauldron in September. You're not here to stop Quirrell, Harry deduced, his green eyes narrowing. You're here to stop me. I am here, Snape said, stepping into the dim light, because an 11-year-old child has no business walking into a chamber with a Dark Lord, no matter how clever he believes his little Slytherin schemes to be. He murdered my family, Harry stated, his voice devoid of all warmth. I am not going to let him walk out of this castle with the stone. I don't care if he is a Dark Lord. I will tear him apart. Snape stopped. He looked deeply into Harry's eyes. For years, Snape had prepared himself to hate the spawn of James Potter. He had expected arrogance, grandstanding, and Gryffindor foolishness. But as he looked at the boy standing before the black fire, he saw none of James. He saw Lily. He saw the exact same fierce, unyielding, terrifyingly protective fire that Lily possessed when she was backed into a corner. But in Harry, that fire had been forged in the dark, twisted by abuse and grief into a cold, calculated thirst for vengeance. It was a dark mirror of the woman Snape had loved. Snape slowly lowered his wand. The internal conflict that had been tearing him apart for a decade suddenly settled into a grim, fatalistic clarity. The boy was a weapon. And right now, the weapon was pointed in the right direction. Quirrell is weak, but the parasite attached to him is not, Snape warned softly, stepping aside, leaving the path to the black fire completely unobstructed. Do not let your arrogance blind you, Potter. Strike fast. And do not hesitate. Harry nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the shift in their dynamic. The potion's master was no longer just an obstacle, he was a silent accomplice. Harry drank the icy potion and walked straight through the black flames. The final chamber was a massive, circular room with vaulted ceilings. In the center stood the mirror of Heist. Standing before it, muttering furiously to himself, was Professor Quirrell. I don't understand. Is the stone inside the mirror? Should I break it? Quirrell whined, his stutter completely gone, replaced by a frantic, desperate edge. I wouldn't advise breaking it, Professor, Harry said, stepping smoothly out of the flames. It's a rather expensive antique. Quirrell whipped around, his eyes widening in shock. Potter, how did you bypass the traps? Snape was supposed to be guarding the corridor. Snape isn't your problem right now, Harry replied calmly, slowly circling the room, putting distance between himself and the flames, keeping his wand trained squarely on Quirrell's chest. You are looking for the stone to bring your master back to life. A master who is currently hiding on the back of your head like a coward. Quirrell flinched as if struck. Let me speak to him. A high, cold, sibilant voice hissed from the empty air. The sound was like dry leaves scraping across stone. It sent a horrific chill down Harry's spine, but he clamped down on the fear, feeding it directly into his anger. Master, you are not strong enough. Quirrell begged. I have strength enough for this. Quirrell reached up and began to furiously unwrap his purple turban. The fabric fell away, revealing a grotesque, chalk-white face protruding from the back of Quirrell's skull. It had slits for nostrils and cruel, red eyes that locked instantly onto Harry. Voldemort. Harry Potter. Voldemort whispered. We meet again. You look terrible, Harry observed coldly, refusing to give the creature the satisfaction of his terror. I expected a Dark Lord, not a parasite. Voldemort laughed, a high, mirthless sound that echoed horribly in the chamber. Bravery. Or perhaps, just Slytherin arrogance. Yes, the hat put you in my house, did it not? I see it in your eyes. You are not a foolish Gryffindor, blinded by light and morality. You understand power. You understand that there is no good and evil, there is only power, and those too weak to seek it. I understand that you came into my house and murdered my parents, Harry countered, his grip tightening on his wand. A necessary casualty of war, Voldemort hissed smoothly, his red eyes flashing. But look at what they left you, Harry. A life with muggles who hate you. A world that expects you to die for them. Why fight for Dumbledore? Join me. Help me retrieve the stone from this mirror. I can give you everything you have ever desired. I can bring your parents back. We can rule together. Voldemort smiled a horrific, lipless smile. He fully believed that a Slytherin could always be bought. He believed that the promise of power and the resurrection of family would instantly break an 11-year-old boy. Harry looked at the twisted face. He thought of his parents. He thought of the 10 years of starvation, the closet under the stairs, the bruises, and the isolation. He thought of the smug, wealthy children of Death Eaters sleeping soundly in their four-poster beds. And then Harry laughed. It wasn't a child's laugh. It was a cold, sharp, mocking sound that completely wiped the smile off Voldemort's face. Bring them back. Harry mocked, his vivid green eyes burning with absolute, concentrated hatred. You think I want to be ruled by the pathetic creature that couldn't even kill a 1-year-old baby? You have nothing I want. And Potters do not bargain with dead men. Kill him. Voldemort shrieked. Quirrell spun around, raising his wand. Expelliarmus. Harry roared before Quirrell could even finish his motion. The red light slammed into Quirrell's chest, throwing the man backward, but Quirrell recovered terrifyingly fast. He deflected Harry's next hex with a lazy sweat of his hand and conjured a rope of thick, black magic that wrapped around Harry's wrists, binding them tightly. "The stone," Voldemort commanded. "Use the boy. He knows how to use the mirror." Quirrell seized Harry by the collar of his robes and dragged him roughly to stand in front of the mirror of Heist. "Look inside," Quirrell demanded. "Where is the stone?" Harry glared at his reflection. Immediately, the image in the glass shifted. His reflection wasn't standing over defeated Death Eaters this time. Instead, it smiled, reached into its pocket, and pulled out a jagged, blood-red stone. The reflection winked and placed the stone back into its pocket. In the real world, Harry felt a heavy, distinct weight drop into the pocket of his robes. He had the Sorcerer's Stone. He had gotten it not because he wanted to use it for eternal life or for gold, but solely because his deepest desire in that exact moment was to deny it to Voldemort, to completely destroy the Dark Lord's hopes. The magic of the mirror recognized his pure, spiteful intent. "What do you see?" Quirrell hissed, shaking him. "I see myself," Harry lied smoothly, a cruel smirk crossing his face. "I'm holding your head on a spike." "He lies," Voldemort screamed. "He has it. Get it from him." Quirrell lunged, his hands wrapping tightly around Harry's throat, driving the boy backward onto the stone floor. Harry choked, his hands instinctively reaching up to grab Quirrell's wrists to pry them off. The moment Harry's bare skin made contact with Quirrell's hands, the defense professor let out a blood-curdling shriek of absolute agony. Quirrell tore his hands away. Where Harry had touched him, the skin was violently blistering, turning black and crumbling like burnt paper. "Master, I cannot hold him. My hands, they are burning." "Seize him. Get the stone." Quirrell, driven by blind terror of his master, lunged again, pinning Harry to the floor. Harry's lightning bolt scar erupted in blinding, agonizing pain. It felt as though a white-hot knife was being driven directly into his brain. His vision swam with black spots. But Harry didn't push Quirrell away. Seeing the damage his touch was inflicting, Harry tapped into the deepest reserves of his rage. He ignored the mind-shattering pain in his scar. He reached up, grabbed Quirrell's face with both hands, and held on with a death grip. Quirrell screamed, a horrific, gurgling wail that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. His face began to blister and crack under Harry's fingers. Harry watched, his green eyes locked onto Quirrell's terrified eyes, offering absolutely no mercy. The smell of burning flesh and ozone filled the air. He watched as the man who had brought Voldemort into the castle physically crumbled to ash beneath his hands. It was violent, it was horrific, and to Harry, it was deeply, profoundly satisfying. This was the first blood drawn in his war. As Quirrell's body finally collapsed into a pile of smoldering dust, the horrific spirit of Voldemort tore itself free from the ashes, shrieking in fury, and flew straight through Harry's chest on its way out of the chamber. The pain in Harry's scar finally peaked, and the world faded into total, merciful blackness. Harry awoke to the blinding white light and sterile smell of the Hogwarts hospital wing. He lay perfectly still, assessing his body. His throat was bruised, his muscles ached, but the piercing pain in his head was gone. "Good afternoon, Harry." Albus Dumbledore was sitting in a chair beside the bed, surveying him over his half-moon spectacles. Harry sat up slowly. "The stone. Destroyed," Dumbledore said calmly. "Nicholas and I had a little chat, and agreed it was for the best. Quirrell did not manage to take it from you." Dumbledore explained the magic of the mirror and the ancient blood protection Lily Potter had placed upon him that caused Quirrell to burn. Dumbledore spoke with a gentle, grandfatherly tone, framing the event as a triumph of love and Gryffindor-like sacrifice. Harry listened in silence, nodding at the appropriate moments. He allowed Dumbledore to believe he was deeply traumatized and humbled by the experience. He played the part of the innocent victim perfectly, shielding the dark, violent satisfaction he actually felt beneath a mask of polite gratitude. Let the old man think he was a pawn for the light. It made it far easier to operate in the shadows. A week later, the Great Hall was draped in magnificent emerald green and silver banners for the end-of-year feast. The Slytherin table was buzzing with victory. Unlike previous years, Where the House Cup was won through sheer bullying and Snape's blatant favoritism, this year was undeniably earned. Harry's aggressive dominance on the Quidditch pitch had secured them a massive points lead. Furthermore, Harry had strictly enforced discipline among the first years, preventing the usual loss of points from foolish midnight duels or petty squabbles. When Dumbledore stood at the podium, he looked across the hall. He had no last-minute Gryffindor points to award. Harry's descent through the trapdoor had been a highly classified secret, and Hermione and Blaise had successfully maintained their silence. "The House Cup," Dumbledore announced, a tight smile on his lips, "goes to Slytherin." The Slytherin table erupted. Draco Malfoy cheered loudly, but as he caught Harry's eye, Draco immediately lowered his head in a subtle sign of submission. Blaise raised his goblet to Harry, and Daphne offered a rare, genuine smile. Across the hall at the Gryffindor table, Hermione Granger caught his eye and gave a small, respectful nod. As Harry boarded the Hogwarts Express the next morning to return to the Surrey suburbs, the transformation was absolute. He was not the frightened, abused boy who had lived in the cupboard beneath the stairs. He sat in a spacious compartment, flanked by his carefully chosen allies. He was the undisputed king of the Slytherin first years. He had successfully orchestrated a heist, manipulated the heirs of his enemies, formed a secret cross-house intelligence network, and turned a servant of the Dark Lord to ash with his bare hands. The train sped southward, away from the Scottish Highlands, but Harry was not going home. He was merely returning to enemy territory to plan his next move. Voldemort was still out there, as were the Death Eaters who funded his reign. Harry Potter looked out the window, his green eyes sharp and cold. The first strike was over. The long game had truly begun. The first strike is over, but Harry's war has only just begun. Now, I want to hear from you. Be honest. Do you prefer this cold, calculating mastermind Harry, or the classic Gryffindor hero? Type Serpent or Lion in the comments right now, and tell me why. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video so you don't miss year 2. See you in the next one.